All right. Let's dive into this whole world of singular propositions.
Okay.
You've brought some excerpts from the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy on this topic, and as a fellow philosopher, you know that
Oh, yeah.
we're in for a treat here.
Absolutely.
We're basically asking, can we actually grasp an individual in thought?
Mm-hmm.
Like, are we talking about Socrates himself?
Yeah.
Or just some kind of abstract description of him?
Right.
And it gets into semantics and language and even a bit of metaphysics?
It really does. So it's a fascinating topic.
Yeah.
What's interesting is that even the existence of singular propositions
Okay.
is something that's debatable.
Right.
It oils down to this fundamental disagreement between Frege and Russell,
Right.
two giants in the field.
Yeah. Frege and Russell, two very different approaches to how we think about individuals.
Absolutely.
What was it about Frege's approach that made singular propositions so tricky?
Well, Frege, with his ideas of sense and reference,
Right.
believed that we think about individuals indirectly
Okay.
through these senses that mediate our understanding. It's like
Okay.
we're grasping a shadow instead of the object itself,
I see.
never quite getting to the true essence of the individual.
So for Frege, there's always this layer of abstraction.
Exactly.
But Russell, he went in a totally different direction, didn't he?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Russell argued for direct acquaintance.
Okay.
So we can have a thought about Socrates, for example, by
Right.
having Socrates himself be a part of that thought.
Gotcha.
Singular propositions for Russell directly contain the individual.
Okay, so Frege is all about description.
Yes.
Russell is arguing for this direct connection
That's right.
between thought and individual.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this isn't just some kind of like academic squabble, right?
Right.
This has implications for how we understand knowledge itself.
Exactly. If Frege is right,
Yeah.
it raises serious doubts about whether we can truly know anything about specific individuals.
Right? Are we stuck in this web of descriptions always one step removed
Yeah.
from reality?
It's a question that's puzzled philosophers for centuries.
It really does make you wonder about like
Yeah.
the limits of human understanding.
Absolutely.
But let's explore some of those arguments in favor of singular propositions.
Okay.
What are some of the most compelling reasons to think that they actually exist?
So one of the strongest arguments, I think, is Kripke's modal argument,
Okay.
which uses this thought experiment.
Okay.
So imagine David, Paul, and Charles.
Okay.
Paul lives in New Jersey.
Okay.
Charles lives in Illinois.
Gotcha.
David points to Paul and says he lives in New Jersey.
All right. Simple enough.
Simple enough.
David's referring to Paul.
Right.
And what he says is true.
Yeah.
What's the twist?
Now imagine a world where Paul and Charles switched places.
Okay.
Everything else being equal.
Okay.
Paul still lives in New Jersey, Charles in Illinois.
Right.
But now is David's statement still true?
Wait, in that world, David would be pointing at Charles, who lives in
Yes.
Illinois. So his statement would be false.
Exactly.
Even though nothing about Paul changed.
That's right. But the proposition itself,
Right.
the one about Paul living in New Jersey,
Mm-hmm.
remains true in this counterfactual scenario.
Okay.
Even though David is pointing at someone else.
Ah, I see where you're going with this.
Yeah.
It's like our minds are locked onto Paul himself,
Yeah.
not just his location at that moment.
Right.
So the truth of the statement isn't about where he's standing, but about Paul himself.
That's right.
And where he thinks.
Precisely. The modal argument suggests that David's thought isn't tied to any contingent properties of
Okay.
Paul and like his position.
Mhm.
Instead, it seems to latch onto Paul himself,
Right.
making it a singular proposition.
That's a powerful point.
It is.
But I'm guessing not everyone agrees with this interpretation, right?
Of course not.
There's always counterarguments in philosophy.
There are always counterarguments.
Yeah.
Some argue that the propositions themselves change
Okay.
depending on the world we're considering.
Right.
So it's not that David's thought is about Paul in every possible world,
Mm-hmm.
but rather that the proposition itself changes
I see.
depending on which world we're looking at.
Okay.
It's a complex debate,
Yeah.
and there are good arguments on both sides.
This is already a fascinating deep dive.
Absolutely.
We've gone from abstract senses to alternate realities.
That's right.
And we're just getting started.
We're just getting warmed up.
I can't wait to see where this goes next.
Me too.
So we've explored how Kripke used possible worlds
Right.
to make the case for singular propositions.
Yeah.
What are some other ways that philosophers have tried
Okay.
to pin down these elusive thoughts?
Well, another fascinating argument comes from the world of indexicals and demonstratives.
Okay.
So think about words like I, today, here,
Right.
this, that.
Yeah.
They always seem to be pointing to something specific,
Mm-hmm.
and their meaning shifts depending on who's speaking and
Right.
when.
Those tricky words that always seem to be context dependent.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. How do those fit into the singular propositions puzzle?
Philosopher John Perry argues
Uh.
that a purely descriptive account of language
Okay.
can't fully capture how these words work.
Right.
He uses a couple of really clever thought experiments to illustrate this.
I'm always a fan of a good thought experiment.
Oh, yeah.
What does Perry have in store for us?
So imagine you're in a harbor city.
Okay.
You see the bow of a ship named Enterprise
Okay.
poking out from behind a building.
Gotcha.
A few blocks away, you see the stern of another ship.
Okay.
No name visible behind a different building.
Okay.
You can't see the parts in between.
All right.
Your friend points to the bow and says, "This is the Enterprise."
Okay.
Or,
True
"That's
statement.
right."
They're referring to the ship we can see with the name Enterprise.
Right.
Where's the problem?
Now imagine your friend points to the stern of the other ship
Okay.
and says, "This is the Enterprise."
Well, that would be false.
Yes.
Even if it turns out that they're both parts of the same ship.
Exactly.
We don't know that yet.
All right.
So we have to assume they are different ships.
That's the point.
Yep.
Here's the catch. If we only relied on descriptions,
Yeah.
both statements would express the same proposition.
Right.
This refers to the Enterprise in both cases.
Right.
But as you said, one is true and the other is false.
So there's something more going on
Yeah.
than just describing the Enterprise.
Right.
It's
Yeah.
about the direct connection
Exactly.
between that word, this,
Yeah,
and the specific part of the ship we're seeing.
that's right. And this is where Perry brings in the idea of singular propositions.
Okay.
To understand those indexicals, we need thoughts that directly link to the specific individual being indicated.
This reminds me of the classic example of Rip Van Winkle.
Oh, yeah.
Waking up after 20 years and still thinking it's the same day.
Yeah,
Even without accurate beliefs about the date,
exactly.
he can still think and talk about that specific day he woke up on.
That highlights the problem
Right.
of relying solely on descriptions for indexical thought.
Right.
It seems we need singular propositions to capture the full meaning of what we're saying.
So indexicals point us toward these singular propositions.
Yes.
Are there any other arguments that lead us down that same path?
Yes, the reduplication argument
Okay.
proposed by Peter Strawson
Okay.
adds another layer to this.
Okay.
Picture a world where everything is duplicated.
Okay.
A philosophical twin scenario.
I'm picturing two of everything
Yes.
identical in every way.
Right.
Kind of a cosmic mirror image situation.
That's it.
Yeah.
Now, in this duplicate world,
Okay.
they have Sally and her duplicate Sally.
Okay.
They're both standing in front of Bill and his duplicate Bill.
Gotcha.
Both Sally and Sally think he has a stain on his shirt.
So both Sally and Sally are having seemingly identical thoughts
Right.
about a man with a stained shirt.
Uh-huh.
But which Bill are they each thinking about?
That's the problem.
Yeah.
If all thought were purely descriptive,
Right.
we couldn't tell which Bill each Sally is thinking.
Right, because they're identical.
Exactly. They're identical even down to that stain.
Even down to that stain, yeah.
Right.
But intuitively, we know
Yes.
Sally is thinking about the Bill she's facing.
Uh-huh.
And Sally's thinking about Bill.
Right.
There's a direct link there.
Yeah.
Something beyond just shared description.
Precisely. Strawson argues that this points to the need
Right.
for a more fundamental way of referring to individuals, something beyond description.
Right.
He calls this demonstrative identification,
Okay.
and it goes hand in hand with singular propositions.
So even in a world of duplicates,
Yes.
we can still have thoughts that are about one specific individual,
Yeah,
even if their twin is identical in every descriptive way.
that's right.
It makes you wonder, what is it about an individual
Right.
that makes them unique?
That's a question that takes us into the realm of metaphysics.
Right.
Which is where things get even more intriguing.
Okay.
Singular propositions, while offering a way to grab individuals directly,
Yeah.
raise some really tough questions about existence, time, and the very structure of reality itself.
Metaphysics, here we come.
Here we go.
I can't wait to dive into those philosophical rabbit holes. All right, so we've seen these arguments from possible worlds and indexicals and even duplicate universes
Right.
pointing towards these singular propositions.
Yeah.
But how do these singular propositions fit into a bigger picture of reality?
Right.
Like, what are the implications for metaphysics?
That's where things get really interesting and challenging.
Okay,
One of the biggest hurdles is reconciling singular propositions with modality,
okay,
the realm of possibility and necessity.
right,
Remember, propositions are generally considered eternal and unchanging.
right. Propositions are these timeless truths or falsehoods.
Exactly.
Yeah, so where's the conflict with singular propositions?
Well, the conflict arises when we consider individuals,
Okay,
which come into and out of existence.
right,
Take the proposition, George Bush does not exist.
okay,
It's clearly false in our world,
right.
but it could have been true.
Yeah, if things had gone differently.
Exactly. So what's the problem?
Yeah, Bush could have never been born, so what's the problem?
Well, if that's a singular proposition,
Okay.
directly containing George Bush as a constituent,
Mm-hmm.
then how can it exist in a world where Bush doesn't?
Right.
How can a proposition be about someone who doesn't exist?
Ah, I see the dilemma.
Yeah,
It's like a clash between the eternal nature of propositions
right.
and the continued existence of individuals.
Exactly.
How can something timeless be about something that might not always exist?
That's the challenge, and this tension has led to some very creative solutions.
Okay.
Some philosophers propose that singular propositions contain individual essences
Okay.
instead of the individuals themselves.
Right.
Think of it like a blueprint.
Okay.
Even if a house is never built, the blueprint still exists.
Right.
These essences would be like blueprints for individuals
Okay.
existing, even if the individual never comes to be.
So even if George Bush doesn't exist in a particular world,
Right.
there's still this Bushness essence floating around.
Exactly.
That's a mind-bending concept.
It is.
Yeah.
Others lean towards possibilism, the idea that individuals exist across a vast multiverse of possible worlds.
Right.
So even if Bush doesn't exist in our world, he might exist in another.
Right.
And that's enough for the proposition to be about him
Okay.
in those worlds.
Multiverse, alternate realities, it's all very thought-provoking.
It is.
It seems like we're stretching the boundaries of what it means for something to exist.
Absolutely.
And there's another layer of complexity to consider: time.
Yes.
Individuals change over time.
Right.
They come into being, they cease to exist.
Uh-huh.
But propositions are supposed to be timeless and unchanging.
That's right.
So how do we reconcile these two?
Yeah, how can a proposition contain an individual who is constantly in flux?
Yeah, that's a tough one.
It is. Let's imagine the proposition Bush is sitting.
Okay.
We know Bush doesn't sit all the time. He
Right.
moves around. He stands
He
up.
does other things, yeah.
So is the proposition true or false?
Well, it seems like it's sometimes true and sometimes false,
Right.
depending on what Bush is doing at any given moment.
Exactly.
But that goes against the idea of propositions having a fixed truth value.
It does. And this is where philosophers debate between perdurantism and indurantism.
Okay.
Perdurantists see individuals as made up of temporal parts, like
Okay.
slices of time,
Right.
each with its own properties.
Gotcha.
So Bush sitting refers to a specific temporal slice
Okay.
where Bush is in fact sitting.
So it's not Bush himself that's in the proposition,
Right.
but a specific snapshot of Bush at a particular time.
Exactly.
That's a clever way to deal with change within a proposition.
It is. Indurantists, on the other hand,
Okay.
believe individuals are fully present
Yep.
at each moment of their existence.
Mm-hmm.
They explain change by saying properties are actually relations to times.
Okay.
So Bush is sitting really means Bush is sitting at time t.
So it's not Bush who is changing,
Right.
but his relationship to the property of sitting
Exactly.
that shifts over time.
That's right. And for the dynamic relativist,
Yeah.
it's the true of the proposition itself that changes relative to different times,
Yeah,
even though the individual and the property remain the same.
So many different ways to tackle this puzzle of
Oh,
change and singular propositions.
right.
It's like philosophers are building this intricate clockwork
Yeah.
to understand how individuals exist within the framework of propositions.
It really is fascinating. Singular propositions seem simple at first,
Right.
but they lead us to some of the deepest questions about existence,
Yeah.
time, and the very fabric of reality.
This deep dive has taken us on quite a journey.
It has.
We started by asking if we can truly grasp individuals in thought,
Right.
and we've ended up exploring possible worlds, alternate realities,
I know, it's amazing.
the nature of time, and even the essence of existence itself.
And that's the beauty of philosophy, isn't it? Singular propositions might not have simple answers,
Right.
but they highlight the power of thought and language
Yeah.
to explore the most fundamental mysteries of the universe.
Mm-hmm.
It's a journey that leaves us with more questions than answers,
Right.
but it's a journey worth taking.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive
It's been a pleasure.
into the world of singular propositions.
My pleasure.